Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 555th New Social Environment. I'm Nick, the Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Tavares Strachan and Amanda Gluibizzi. We're thrilled to welcome poet Funto Omojola here to close today's program. We'd also like to thank Marian Goodman Gallery for sponsoring today's event and making this conversation possible. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a living document of resources and actions that we will be posting in just a moment. And over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has brought together art, music, dance, film, theater, literature, and thoughtful social and political meditations in our monthly publication and our public events like here in our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support our writers, editors, and operations here at the Rail. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest and host. Born in Nassau, Bahamas, Tavares Strachan lives and works between New York and Nassau. His artistic practice activates the intersections of art, science, and politics, offering uniquely synthesized points of view on the cultural dynamics of scientific knowledge. He has been the recipient of numerous awards, most recently Artist in Residence at the Getty Research Institute from 2019 to 2020, and his current exhibition, The Awakening, is on view at Marian Goodman Gallery, New York through June 11th. Our host is formerly Associate Professor at Ohio State University. Amanda Gluibizzi is the founding co-director of the Newt Foundation for Art History and an art scene editor here at the Brooklyn Rail. She specializes in mid and late 20th century art, design, and urbanism in the United States, Europe, and Latin America. Amanda is the author of Art and Design in 1960s New York from Anthem Press, 2021. And without further ado, over to you, Amanda.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick. And thank you everyone for being here on a finally nice day after such a horrible weekend that we all went through. I was realizing actually that in 3 days, it will have been 2 years since I did my first NSE. And I was surprised to realize that it's been 2 years, and I've been so delighted to make all of your acquaintance and to become friends with you. It's something that I did not expect to happen during the pandemic. I should also point out that this is our NSE number 555. And so let's pause for a moment too and realize how much work that takes and how much effort our friends at the Rail put in to produce these. It's a labor of love and they do it so well. Thank you so much. So Tavares, congratulations on your show at Marian Goodman. It is something that you really do have to go and experience it to try to begin to understand what Tavares has created and the world that he has made for you. So we're going to talk about it, but we can't really even describe it because it's just so singular and so spectacular. So if you haven't set up an appointment to go to Marian Goodman to see the exhibition yet, please go do so. It's really, really wonderful. And I'm thrilled to be able to speak with Tavares today. One of the things that you suggested to me was that you were thinking a lot about learning and unlearning with this exhibition. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so having grown up in Nassau, in the Bahamas, one of the things that I remember from my childhood was that so much of creative practice and community practice was delivered in a way that wasn't siloed. And I guess one of the things that I learned in my high-powered, American Western education was how to segregate between genres. And in that process of segregating between genres, I kind of forgot about all of the kind of local / indigenous knowledge that I already acquired from being a kid. And so like one example of that is there's this event called Junkano, Junkanoo, and it's this real hybrid of poetry and and history and storytelling and dance and food, and there's no real hierarchy. And so, I think I'd kind of learn in the process of being a student in America about all of these histories, and in essence neglected to some extent all of this knowledge that I'd learned since I was a kid.
And so when you're thinking about this hybrid practice, how does something begin for you then? Is it just like a cacophony and you start pulling things out that are interesting to you, or does it start with a single image and then you start building from that?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all those things, really.
Mm-hmm.
I think narrative is really significant and important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of the narratives that really struck me that were about history were narratives that I received in ways that were abstract. So they were kind of nonlinear narratives that I pulled from, for example, music.
Mm-hmm.
Music was a huge inspiration to me growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up listening to a lot of reggae music, a lot of dancehall, roots rock, dub. And if you listen to that, excuse me, if you listen to that music, I think one of the things you'll realize is that those particular artists, those legendary artists that were making that music in the 70s and 80s, and even some degree the 60s, were really good at provoking you to go on your own journey with the information that they were giving you in the music.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things about artistic practice for me is not about providing some solution, but provoking curiosity about some of the things that that you should find on your own and not be led to.
Mm-hmm. Nick, that seems like a great moment to look at some images from Tavares's show. These are some of the paintings that are included in the exhibition right now. And I think that we can really see a visual invocation of what you were just suggesting there, Tavares, that these are complex and layered and could suggest a narrative, but don't have a linear structure to them.
Yeah, I think actually just riffing on from Jonkanu, I think the setup here is similar to maybe costume making, in the sense that when you're creating a costume that someone has to wear or inhabit, like visual balance and structural balance is really important. And so the doubling comes into effect. And in this instance, it's represented in a way that's visual, but it's also, for me, functioning as a structural balance.
Mm-hmm. So we have literal doublings here,
Yeah.
both with the image presumably taken from a photograph, and also the suggestion of the African mask that we're looking at, the basketball hoops and profile.
Mm-hmm. And the image that looks like a photograph is actually a painting.
Yes, but is it drawn from a photograph?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think too, what's really interesting about this particular image, and I was so happy that you had included it in the images we're looking at for today, is that we're also seeing the golden section here, which is of course a way of thinking about expansion or retraction, but can also be a way of thinking about something in terms of fractalization, right? And so you can actually start to think about multiplication in fascinating ways.
Yeah, I mean, it was also a really nice excuse to talk about Marcus Garvey.
Okay, tell us about that.
No, I mean, I think His Honorable Marcus Garvey was an inspiration to me from I was 8, 9 years old, and I think unfortunately he's one of the folks whose stories have been kind of more or less, I wouldn't say erased, but more or less whitewashed from the lexicon of historic leaders that existed in the past 100 years. He was many things. He was a scholar, obviously an orator. He was an entrepreneur. You know, he had a publishing company. He started a Black Star Line. He was the head of the UNIA, which by 1925 had at least 6 million members. He was really a Renaissance guy who believed in equal rights and justice for all, and had ideas that, you know, in my mind are still more or less radical in this environment that we're living in. So again, this is like the work was, for me, the work was this one in particular was a way for me to think about getting an audience curious about who the figure is and to go on their own journey.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking too about the golden section being overlaid on top of this suggestion of the cosmos, and thinking about the ways that long distance satellites, so like Voyager, were propelled beyond Jupiter, right? So the scientists in the 70s took the trajectory around Jupiter and actually used it as a slingshot to move Voyager then to Saturn. And what was really fascinating about that to me, and something I didn't realize until I was an adult, is that their projections actually follow the golden section.
Yeah, I mean, Garvey specifically was really interested in time as an element, time in relation to storytelling. And his middle name was Mosiah, kind of after Moses, or Messiah. And it's funny because one of the things that he said was, he was delivering a speech in Harlem in the mid-20s, and he was under scrutiny by then J. Edgar Hoover, who was the director of the FBI. And one of the things he said was, I know my enemies are in this room, and if you try to get rid of me, if you try to kill me, you won't be successful, and if you are, I will haunt you from the grave. And I think there's this really nice relationship between the way that Garvey thought about time travel and time, and how narratives can exist throughout time, and there's no way to silence these narratives. And in the similar way the Egyptians thought about time, space travel, the afterlife. And I think to your point, I think there's some nice relationships there.
Mm-hmm. And then can you tell us a little bit too about this overlay of the basketballs? A lot of your work also has overlays of playing fields.
Yeah, I think when you think of like, for example, my experience as a Black boy, there's all this pressure on your body, and so much of that pressure has to do with performance and the expectation that you're gonna be involved in sport in some way, and that's a language that the world has kind of framed your existence within. And I think there's duality there, because obviously there's a love-hate relationship with that framing. But I also think there's something about sports that is philosophy and poetry and magic. And so I really love the double meaning in thinking about sports as a symbol for this kind of violent expectation on the body, on the Black body specifically, but also sport as a meeting place, as a social place for kids in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. I was reminded too, as I was walking through your exhibition, of the recent show that was just up in Chelsea called In the Paint. Brilliantly named. Just wonderful paintings of basketball hoops again. And there too, a duality between an interest in the sport, but also an interest in the way that the sport allows for painting, and an interest in pure painting. Just like a really wonderful way of manipulating this concept.
I just also think that the fragility and the absurdity of life, right? Like if you think of most sports, you can, on a given night, in the more successful ones, you can have 60,000 people, 100,000, 1 million people watching someone put a ball in a hoop and celebrating with great vigor. about that act, which has an absurd parallel to art making, right? Like it's if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I would say that sport and art would probably not necessarily rank extremely high on that. However, I think the thing that I'm interested in is the ridiculous dimension of them both, and almost having them collide as a way to talk about how lovely some of those relationships are, and how absurdity is really essential.
Well, and how fleeting they are as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a moment of a ball in a hoop, or the moment of the ball ricocheting off the hoop, and also the fleetingness of a sporting career, right? I mean, it can be gone in an instant. It's such an interesting way too of thinking about the instantaneity of art, and this idea of like smacking you right in the face in a moment.
Yeah, and also just the creativity, the fact that it's all literally just made up, like all the rules that an artistic practice or an artistic subculture are made of just some people coming up with things and agreeing, and then you have it.
It's true. I always think too about interviews with tennis players, and when they ask the great tennis players, how big is the ball to you? And they say, oh, it looks like a basketball to me.
Yeah.
And of course, to me, it looks like a fly, right? Because I can't do anything with it, And there too, the way of understanding and seeing and honing your talent.
It's funny, the great Will Chamberlain, who notoriously scored 100 points in a game, and I think he averaged 50 that season, had adopted the granny free throw, which I don't know if you guys know what that is, but that's the underhanded free throw. And he learned it from a guy named Rick Barry, who played for the Golden State Warriors. Anyway, he averaged 50 points a game that season, but he stopped shooting the ball underhanded because it didn't look cool. Even though he shot about, I think he averaged around 70, 80% from the free throw line that season, shooting underhanded. He went back to averaging 50% because it didn't look cool. And I just think, again, the dynamic of rule making, the intersection of style and aesthetic, all those dynamics actually matter. And one of the greatest basketball players to ever live decided that he would go with a lower shooting percentage because it mattered the way he looked from the free throw line.
I mean, I think that totally is understandable, frankly, as a person who loves art, right? I mean, art is withholding, right? And so I can completely understand that. Do you relate to that or no?
So I'm a huge Rick Barry fan, and if you talk to Rick, if you listen to any of Rick's podcasts or interviews about this story, he just thought it was ridiculous because Rick shot this way his entire career. Yeah. And I think Rick averaged like high 90s from the free throw line, just because of the mechanics of the body. Yeah. The way that you lock your elbows, the trajectory of the shot being dead on is higher if you shoot underhanded from the free throw line versus shooting overhanded. But good luck getting any player to shoot underhanded today.
I'm having a hard time imagining that, I have to say. Well, speaking of style and the way that you present yourself, Nick, let's go to the next image. Because I think we have so much then here to speak about, particularly the absolutely most magnificent hat ever being worn by Shirley Chisholm here. A really, really wonderful fedora. Tell us about Conquering Lion. Who are we looking at in this image?
Yeah, it was really about the relationship between this Ethiopian emperor named Haile Selassie and the queen. And His Majesty Haile Selassie is the only person on record that the queen had to bow to because emperors outrank queens. And I thought this was just a really fascinating place to begin a conversation about the way that we understand history, the way that we understand power, the way that we understand the dynamics, these dynamics. And yeah, it was just really, this work was just really a meditation on that idea.
Can you tell me a little bit here about when you chose to keep things in grisaille or in black and white, and when you chose to move things into color imagery?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it's there's, you know, it's like a system in my head about just balance, again, simple balance. You know, the balance of color, the balance of black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I think these works are, again, they're kind of non-linear riffs on an ideal or story I was, you know, that I would hope that would hopefully provoke curiosity about the characters and their relationships. And again, the idea is that you go on your own journey if you're ever so inspired to. And I think actually it's one of the interesting things about Caribbean music, or even Black music in general, the blues, jazz, you know, rap, rock music, reggae, when they're the purest, half the audience never really understands what they're really saying, right? I mean, I remember listening to records for at least 10 years of my life, and I'm just getting the lyrics today. And I think that way of decompressing, decoding, having different experience over time with material is really, really important for me. And so it's not as if I'm making something that I understand all of the components of. For me, even they reveal themselves to me over time.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating to me that you mentioned jazz here, because of course, I'm thinking about the way that you would play something and then later on in the song might play it backwards. And of course, looking at these two crossword puzzles and realizing that they're the reverse of each other, right? One is right side up and one is upside down, but we're not exactly sure which one is which, right? I'm assuming they're identical, although I can't be sure because of the overlay here.
Or that you can flip the picture also.
Right. And then of course the track here then allows it to act like a round or a fugal structure, right? And so what we're doing then is keep coming back around and around. So it's really, really fascinating to me that you're referencing music, particularly with this image.
Yep. I mean, music is I think music was really the gateway for me, especially because so many of the artists weren't really seen as real artists when they were making the work that they were making. And to think that, like, for example, I think it was like early 90s when Jay-Z, Sean Carter won his first Grammy, they weren't letting, I don't think they were letting rappers go on stage to get the award. And it's like what, 92, 93, I don't remember when that was, but it's not that long ago, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's insane, right? I mean, you and I were young people at that point, and it's crazy to think that, you know, the people that you're listening to, you can't see because you're not permitted to see them. This is a nice segue into talking about the idea that you told me about who decides what is seen and unseen. And this is something that's of interest to you, particularly in your encyclopedia of the invisible. Pages of which were kind of suggesting through the distance in that one image, but then also what we're seeing here.
Yeah, it was such a crazy encounter I had with it. I'm sure most everyone in the Zoom probably had some interaction with the encyclopedia or an encyclopedia or some institution that is archetypal in nature and has a you know, an authority backing. I think for me the impetus behind this work was that if everything that was included had a place to go, then could we make a place for the things that weren't included? And what does that look like and feel like? And then I think the other piece of it was, one of the challenging things about critique is the problem is, for me, is when you become really good at critique, you end up becoming the thing that you're criticizing. And I think that's, it's one of the challenges of making a work like this, right? How do you not replace one idea with another that is that could potentially be filled with the same trappings, right?
Right. I mean, it's a Borgesian problem, right?
Yeah.
That once you create the thing that recreates the world that we live in, it's basically then an overlay of our world, and then we can't see our world for what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's why, it's like it's why I now value being an artist, right? I mean, I think it's different from being, for me, it's different from being occupying the role of, or the responsibility of educator or scholar or statesperson, or just because I think I think then my responsibility becomes, constantly asking myself the hard question, which is, and not being afraid of undoing the thing that I did. And I just think thinking through how imperfect we all can be at times, and being able to acknowledge the fragility of that, and not have the work replace, not have the work do the thing that I'm against.
Mm-hmm. And then how do you do that? By creating the encyclopedia itself, or by creating the images and the objects that overlay the encyclopedia?
I think for me, it's like by thinking about it as a proposal, like it really is a thought experiment, like like what happens when you take all the things that weren't included and put it in one spot. It's not necessarily a solution to a problem, but more a series of curiosities that were inspired by a problem.
When I was visiting your show on Friday, one of the things that my eye immediately went to was Mary Wollstonecraft, and the vindication of the rights of women. This is something that's very, very much on my mind right now. And so I was attempting to read the text, which was a little difficult because it's slightly above my head and the type is small. And found myself getting angrier and angrier as I was standing in the room.
I'm sorry.
You shouldn't be sorry. It's not your fault. It is other people's fault that I was getting angry.
Yeah, no, I think, again, a part of the duality, like one of the things that one of my favorite reggae singers likes to say is equal rights and justice for all. And I think it's one of those statements that one makes in the absence of those conditions. Because I think if we had equal rights and justice for all, you wouldn't have to say it, right?
Yes.
Anyway, just that phrase always stuck with me.
One of the other images that's overlaid on top of the encyclopedia in your current exhibition is a painting of Septimius Severus. And this is also something that you mentioned specifically to me. The question about who is Septimius Severus, and then also what is the role of research in work, you said, although I'm wondering if you meant in your work or if you meant in work in general.
I think the research is the work, really. I think it's I mean, I think about it in a more elastic, more malleable way, that can a piece of research become, or is it the thing? And for me, I think it is. And I think the Septimius Severus piece was just a way for me, again, to get folks to go on their own journey in this Zoom, like to go check out who Septimius Severus is. Because he was like a Garvey character before Garvey, right? Roman emperor of African descent and birth, and helped build the city of London, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I think for me, it was just like oh, by the way, look at this guy who is pretty great. And that was pretty much it.
Why Septimius Severus and not Africanus?
Oh, I think wait for the next show.
Oh, okay. Ooh. You heard it here first. One of the things that I was really struck by looking at the show itself is that so often your painterly figures are in 3/4 profile and your sculptures face us. And I'm really, really curious about this. Obviously, part of it, I think at least, is that a lot of your sculptures are also referencing African sculptures, and so which may have been masks, right? So they probably were meant to fit fully on the face. But I was very, very curious about this turning between fully facing us and slightly turning the cheek, if you will.
Yeah, I think I'm always interested in the photograph, like the idea of taking something, like taking a photograph, the digital image, and where the digital intersects with digital and material collide. And also just the collapsing of the hierarchy. So I think they both have photographic approaches. So even the sculptures, they either come from some sort of digital technology or and I think for me, if you have the privilege of visiting the Bahamas and you come to Junkanoo, you'll understand a lot more about some of the setups, because some of them come from, again, the physical limitations of making something that a human being will inhabit and carry down a street for several hours. And so the balance piece of it, just the layout, the frontal versus, are all conditions of being able to move down the street wearing an object, a piece of art, for example.
I thought about weight a lot in your exhibition. How much does the encyclopedia weigh? How much does that sculptural object, which was based on a mask, weigh? It is a way actually of thinking about the material or the materiality of your work. So I'm really curious, how much does that encyclopedia weigh? Can I lift it?
Probably not alone, no. No. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what your gym membership situation is.
Totally 98-pound weakling.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think the idea of erasure, historical erasure, is heavy, right? It's heavy. It's like if you think about women talking about equal pay for the same work, or if you're talking about people saying Black Lives Matter, or if you think about how curriculums are being constructed in schools, that stuff is heavyweight stuff. And I think one of the tricks of society is that it's presented in a way that doesn't seem like it is weighted. And I think that's why the uprisings, they happen after so much time and building, and people saying in their own nice and quiet way, hey guys, here's the problem. And eventually that goes from quietly saying it to loudly saying it to, as Bob Marley would say, burning and looting.
And how do you feel like you make sure that we look at certain things? How do you pull out what you pull out?
I think it's just having faith in the ability of the creative process to inspire people to look. I don't think, I think for me, like, I'm just trying to make my version of good music, right? And in that music, there are elements of humanity's struggle in general, and mixed with humanity's joy and pleasure. And I feel like if you if it moves you, if the spirit moves you, it does,
Mhm.
I don't think there's any way to guarantee or ensure that it happens, but it's
Agreed.
in there, it's in stride.
Do you see yourself as having an oral practice then, where you pass on stories about your installations and your work so that they can then continue a tradition once you've decided to stop making them, or once you pass on?
I think the perspective of oral traditions for me is difficult, because I think I was once speaking with an historian, and their position was that the version of history that we have today is a result of the written word. Therefore, if it wasn't written, then by default it's not history. But I think there's, obviously that there are a number of challenges to that idea, specifically that the body has an ability to withhold information on a cellular level. I mean, this is the whole study of epigenetics. But we also know that, again, the hierarchy of oral versus written versus painting versus sculpture versus photography versus, you know, cookery are all, as we discussed earlier, all invented. So why couldn't they all collide? And you end up with something that was an amalgamation of communal and cultural and social experience that does all of the information exchange we need.
I'm sensitive of time, so I'm going to ask you one last question, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Nick so that we can include our participants in the questions. One of the things you ended your conversation with me before we talked today was that you were thinking a lot about the world right now, and as you put it, the world in flux. And so what is the power of craft and making? And so I am curious about that. First, in terms of the compulsion to make, the insistence on making a mark, both literally and figuratively. Is it an ethical practice, and where does that take you?
Yeah, I think so many of the artists that I looked up to growing up were very disciplined in their approach to making, in the sense that if they were an artist, they were artists. They were painters, they were sculptors, and this is by no means a knock to any of that, because I think, again, I think I started by saying I look up to these artists. I think there's so many artists living today who are artists / community organizers / mothers / museum builders / spiritualist. And I think for me, I think the idea that there's so many artists that I know that have artist in residency programs that they run, or foundations, or they're not just thinking about operating in a space that is, in a square mile in New York City. They're thinking about operating in the communities in which they were either birthed in or have some deep connection to, and are interested in deeply giving back to those communities. And they're considering that sense of responsibility and giving as a part of their role as an artist, right? And I think that really is, to me, I think, as a kind of counterpoint to the climate and political instability that we're having. I think that's a really lovely counterpoint to think of all of the great artists who are alive today, who could just go off having great careers as visual artists, but who are doing really, really important work in communities that they care deeply about. To me, is like a really beautiful story here, right? And that maybe is not really talked about enough. Like, these artists who could be doing anything else with their time, they're really being challenged to consider this community service as their work, right?
Mhm. So then we can think about care or generosity as a medium.
Yeah, totally. And all, but also like as a part of a continuum, right? Like
Mhm.
as a part of a cycle of creativity, as a cycle of understanding that, like, you know, how do you balance, you know, people who are in politically or economically depressed communities with painting? How do you balance people who don't have food to eat with making music? How do you think about all those things simultaneously? Because all those things relate to each other.
Mhm. I think for my end, that's a really, really lovely place for me to step back. And so, Tavares, thank you again for speaking with me. I'm going to turn it over to Nick so that we can take some questions from our participants. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Yes,
Thank
thank you. Thank you both. Thank you so much, Tavares and Amanda. And once again, we encourage everyone to go see this exhibition at Marian Goodman. And we'll post a link in the chat. But yeah, we'll take it to some questions from the audience. We will pass the mic over to our friend G.E. Schwartz first. G.E., you should be able to.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Nick. And thank you, Amanda and Tavares. Thank you so much for this introduction to your work. So amazed. Can you talk a little bit about the metaphor of dawn and how the differentiation of light and darkness drives and corresponds to your work?
Yeah. So light defines space. To those of us who are in the visual world, but I think that the experience that I've had with exploration, you know, whether it be North Pole exploration, whether it be deep sea exploration, space exploration that I've been a part of, or just like being a kid on the ocean on the islands without shoes on. I think one of the things that you learn is that it's difficult to describe on the color wheel when yellow turns to orange, right? For example. And that slippage is the piece that I'm always interested in, right? Like, and I think one of the things when I started by talking about the academy, for me, the academy for me was all about making it clear when orange turned to yellow, which is an impossible feat. So I think that the problem of light and dark is really essential to any artist practice, really. And to get lost in it, to love it, to hate it, is a part of the poetry making exercise, I believe.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much. Slippage. Yes, indeed. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, G.E. Next, we're going to pass the mic over to our friend Lynn Crawford. Lynn, you should be able to turn your mic on now.
Hi, thank you so much. I was thinking, so during your talk about a phrase that I'm in Detroit, and a lot of the techno musicians here talk about misusing the machine. And it's so interesting because over time you look at machine as not just the object, but as a structure, and misusing certain things means changing them and allowing the use of other things. And I'm just curious if you know that quote and what you think of it, and if that's part of your practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so many of my favorite artists misuse the machine in their careers. Like a good example of that is James Honeyboy Edwards or James Brown, for example, or like Bob Dylan, like those guys who are constantly, you know, challenging the fundamentals of limitation, right? So I'm interested. I mean, maybe I'm the worst person to ask this question to, because I'm interested in misusing the machine.
No, that's what I was thinking.
Oh, okay, yeah,
That's
for sure.
why I asked you. I'm thinking the whole time from
Yeah.
the beginning that I couldn't stop thinking about that. So I just wanted to share it.
Yeah, no, it's for sure. I think it's critical. I think if instruments weren't taken out of schools in the late 60s and 70s, in the Bronx and in places like Kingston to Black kids, then you wouldn't have reggae music, which evolved from taking samples and scratching records because you didn't have instruments. So the record itself, the material object became an instrument. And if you ask anyone who listens to records, it might tell you that scratching a record to make another beat it might not be the perfect use of the machine, but the birth of this beautiful music comes from abject denial and limitation of access to instruments in school. And now you got, some of the best artists in the world now, right?
I was thinking of your work also as not just the physical machine, but structures that become machines. The way you sort of, infiltrate them. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for that answer and that question, Lynn. I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague, Raven.
Hello. So my question was, why did you title it The Awakening? I know it's like a simple question, but.
Yeah. So The Awakening is a part of a trilogy, of which 2 more exhibitions will exist at the end of this year in October in Paris. So part 1 of it was The Awakening, and part 2 is in broad daylight, and the other part is in total darkness. So there are 3 exhibitions over the course of the year. But The Awakening was, for me, it was very personal because it was like the moment that I discovered Garvey as a kid, right? So much of it goes back to that that moment for me, because I was on a stoop, was listening to some Burning Spears. They said Garvey. I said, oh shit, I should figure out who that is. Started asking the people in my neighborhood, and kind of it all came from there. So, and I also think it's a counterpoint to being woke. Like, to me, it's like The Awakening is more active than the idea of woke. It's like this obvious state. Like awakening, you have to continue to check in. It's in process. And so, yeah, that's kind of where the origin of the title, came from.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you for that question, Raven, and for that answer, Tavares. I am going to pass the mic over to the Rail's own Phong H. Bui now. Phong, you should be able to turn on your mic. There we are.
Hi, Tavares.
Hey, Phong.
Hey, I haven't seen the show, so I can't wait. Very eager to see it, and in order to have more substantive question to ask you. But I just want to add the continuity in your work, that the strand that go from the very beginning is I remember meeting you in early 2003 or so when you were showing at Pirogi. And then soon after, a year after or so, at Ronald Feldman. And what have sustained in my thinking about the work is that there's a certain kind of intense subtlety that exists between strength and fragility. The sense of memory, the probability of recall, recognition, which is strength, where fragility, it's always, thrive on decay, things that are not going to sustain or able to persist its own form of shape, so to speak. And I always felt there was that incredible mediation between the two. Your interest in, for example, the early landmark piece, the piece of large eyes that you were able to bring from the North Pole and trying to contain it in some way. Being in space, floating in space, is no more, no less than great basketball player that you mentioned, able to, allow their body in space when they leap to put the basket or even dunk the basket. I mean, these are the incredible athleticism as much as able to sustain their body in space. So my question is very simple. Strength is part of your conceptual idea how to make the work materialize in some way. And part of your memory, and hopefully it will be part of our memory in seeing the work. But the fragility is the part that I think is very fascinating. So I wanted to ask in this time, because you've been doing a long time, what's your concept?
Yeah.
I know it changed shapes, permutation all the time, but at the moment, because we are in a very precarious time, as Amanda mentioned earlier. So what are you thinking about that at the moment?
I thank you for that, Fong, and good to see you.
Good to see you.
I think my response to that is it might be a little it might be perceived as a little cliche, but I think it's just love. I think if you think of all the artists that you probably love, it's because they love something deeply, right? And I think within that love is fragility, and then that fragility is the ability to take risk, and know that like you could work very long on something and someone could just not get it or not connect with it or not relate to it, but it doesn't necessarily stop you from doing it, right? And I think so much of the practice that I grew up with in Bahamas was about being committed, loving what you're doing so much, being so enthralled by what you're doing that like your biggest dream is that people connect with it, but it's not a deterrent. And I think that is where the fragility for me comes in, being able to accept that it might not connect, and but having the courage to take that risk.
Yeah, it's super true. I've been listening a great deal, when I don't always have the time to do anything else, I would start working on the portrait, which is the end of the month. Yours is forthcoming. It's already in the calendar to accommodate with Amanda, in-depth interview, conversation with you. But lately, I've been listening to a lot of Bob Marley, early with the Wailers, and knowing a great deal about his story, how he not only plays soccer, but so much time spent with children. And I think that's interesting to understand the root of his music. It's also the community, the love for the community, for all the fellow beings, human beings, really too. So that's say a lot. Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. Yes, it's true, because even the extent, I was talking to Carl, my assistant, the other day, that Van Gogh was not so sure whether his own work, because the security of the painting will be survive or not. He really willfully, in some odd way, consciously, I would argue, that written the letter is another testament of his enduring and concrete existence of that time. So it's subject to, if the painting don't make it, doesn't move us, the record of his letter would. So that's another form of love. You're absolutely right about that. Thank you, Tavares.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the show. Can't wait to see the show.
Thank you.
Ciao. Back to you, Nikki.
Thank you, Fong. And what a beautiful way to conclude today's conversation on this note of love. So it is our tradition here to end our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Funto Omojola here. Nigerian-American writer, performer, and visual artist Funto Omojola is founder and editor of the literary journal Ewa. Funto is living in New York, but not for too long. So over to you, Funto.
Thank you, Nick. I hope everyone can hear me. And thank you for that brilliant conversation, Tavares. I'm gonna be doing a deep dive on Junkanu right after this. So today I'm just going to be reading some excerpts from a book-length poetic work in progress titled Components of a Child's Destiny, and there's a party in the canopy, and I make an oil painting of a bribe. For a while, it's just me. I put on morning jacket wherever I can fit it, peel skin, shave, meet the girl of my dreams. But then this psychic tells me my twin daughters are gonna love me, really love me, like be obsessed with me. And so in the midst of decorating womb, the elder uncoils and unvessels. I prepare the entirety of the Oh She Glows cookbook and we both sugar our lips. Maybe one shogu, but it only takes a handful of guests to tap on something swelling before you realize raw can't go through you the same way anymore. And what a silly thing it is to not be able to release it. By the time they found my mother, she'd rolled under the bed. They found my mother rolled under the bed, screaming, "Oh, mommy." What is this tumbling place where only I am center unmoving? What is this tumbling stage around me and around me, where there are gestures and long-held sticks curved towards my chest? In a different time, story, we are gathered in perfectly shapen basins. In a different time, Barry White the dog croaks around us, and we are preoccupied with the croak, not where it will land or its projection or its mouth. In a different time, story, someone can be heard shouting about a fissured egg, and men who fissured egg in egg sack. Everyone is not sure who is in charge here. There's a man for each sack, each with a man with a sickle for each sack. In 1973, Grandpa Ado rode his motorcycle to Ikiti and broke his arms on his way back. The people at St. Gregory on Basiri Street covered him in plaster of Paris, and he spent all of January with his arms outstretched like Jesus. What is this sirening place where I am edges cascading? Croak us your mouth quickly, not soft, Barry White the dog. These days, there is only one man and one sickle for all the sacks. Inside the place where we were warned not to eat food, my mother, the butcher, says, you match the walls, and I do, and I eat fig and fig inside fig. The whole village knows the story of the restaurant where they go and kill the goat only after you've ordered. Go and get on Okada to choose the goat, to slaughter the goat, to bring the goat back. My mother, the scalpel wielder, says, come and dance, and I do. Slender arm reaching for goat head, sanctifying where tendon and bone and bowel meet. I dig and move to the shiniest thing in the room. My mother, the nothing is shiny enough to put here, says, you woke up from the coma birth, no record, creative tendencies. No, I woke up from the coma soil. In the middle of the pale man's table is just soil. Abundance is just the getting on the Okada and going to slaughter the goat and bringing it back 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 and bringing it back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Funto, for sharing that with us today. Of course, thank you, Tavares and Amanda, for a wonderful conversation. We'd also like to share a very special thank you to Mariko and Daniela from Isolated Labs Incorporated, and Linda, Jonathan, and the extended team at Marian Goodman Gallery for helping to make today's conversation possible. And we encourage everyone to view our archive of these conversations on our YouTube channel, where we will upload today's conversation shortly. If you can, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern for a conversation with Morgan Basicus and Ksenia M. Soboleva on the occasion of Basicus's exhibition at Bridget Donahue. You can now all turn on your microphones to say hello and goodbye, and congratulations, Tavares. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Tavares.
you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thanks
So
much.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Tavares.
Amanda and Funto.
Thank you, Tavares.
Great exhibition.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
And congratulations
Thank
on
you
the
very
show.
much.
Yes.
Great poem this afternoon.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Tavares. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Funto, for the
Thank you,
poem.
Amanda, as
Beautiful.
well.
Beautiful
Thank you.
reading. So
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you for the beautiful
Agreed.
reading.
Yeah.
And go
Excellent.
see the show, everybody. Please do.
I
It
did.
must be experienced in person.
Yes, amazing.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Happy Monday and
Happy Monday.
stay safe.
Let's get some lunch. Love and peace. Love and peace.
Love, yes. Bye.
Love.
Love and peace.
Bye.
Okay.
Love
Bye,
and
everyone.
courage.
Bye.
Good luck.